oh, she's a fascist. No, no, no. I mean, this is for real fascists, like real, American History X skinheads, the real deal. No fooling around. This is a fascist police state. And the Zelensky regime is a regime that before the war was repressing journalists, was shutting down news organizations that were critical of his regime. And you have to keep in mind that Zelensky is an actor. He's not the real power in Ukraine. The real power is ultimately the true president of Ukraine is a woman named Victoria Nuland, who is the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in the US State Department. She's been micromanaging Ukraine since 2013. She is the person most responsible for this mess that we're in. And I can tell you in detail. I mean, I don't know if you want me to just keep on ranting and telling you the story about this.
Well, yeah, keep on talking. I mean, I'm not even going to pretend to be any type of expert in these affairs.
Oh, neither
this is
am I.
not something
Yeah.
I've looked into in any depth. And obviously, you're coming with some major claims here, and there will be people listening going, wait, hang on. What's this guy talking about? But this podcast is called Real Talk with Zuby. I like to get perspectives from different angles. I'm not into, just going with one narrative. I think everybody should be able to speak their piece, of course.
Sure.
So carry on with what you're saying there.
Okay, so you have to understand that Zelensky was a television and film actor in Ukraine before 2018 when he ran for president. Now, the issue of what you call it, of Zelensky, he was hired by a man named Ihor Kolomoisky, who is a Ukrainian Israeli Cypriot financier oligarch. He's one of the famous oligarchs of extremely rich men. He's one of them. And he has deep ties to organized crime in multiple countries. And he owns 1+1 Media. And he also owns or has a very large share of Burisma, the famous gas company, Ukrainian gas company, that had Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, as a member of the board. By the way, everything that I'm telling you, this is on Wikipedia. This is common knowledge. You can find it anywhere. I'm not making any claim that is, and crazy as the story sounds, it's all true. That's why it's so crazy. So anyway, Zelensky had no political interest whatsoever. He was just an actor, a very successful local actor, as people are in different countries. And he specialized in romantic comedies, that kind of thing. And Ihor Kolomoisky hired him because Kolomoisky himself had political ambitions. He actually ran for president in 2014, and he crashed and burned. And so he figured that he'd hire an actor to play the role of president in a TV show and transition this actor into an actual candidate, which is basically what he did. From 2015 to 2018, Zelensky was an actor playing the role of an accidental president in this TV show called Servant of the People. And Kolomoisky organized a political party called Servant of the People, a real political party, and transitioned Zelensky, the actor, into Zelensky, the presidential candidate. And they astroturfed the show and astroturfed the political support of the party Servant of the People. And because of the negative appreciation of the previous president, all of a sudden Zelensky is president of Ukraine in 2019. And he ran on a platform of inclusivity, all the typical Western values that we love so much, diversity, all the good stuff. And one of the principal issues was that, you see, Ukraine is a divided country. There are essentially two ethnic groups. There are ethnic Russians and ethnic Ukrainians. The ethnic Russians are in the east and the south, all along the Black Sea. And the ethnic Ukrainians tend to be in the center and towards the west. Now, you do have to keep in mind that towards the west, towards the town of Lviv, it is, there's no other way to put it, it's fascist country. The people out there are hardcore fascists.
When you say that, what exactly does that mean? Because that's a very
loaded
bold
term,
and broad statement.
Yeah, they are people who admire Adolf Hitler and the whole Third Reich Nazi regime.
When you say the people, are you talking about the general population? Or are you talking about certain factions?
A large minority of politically active people in the West, in the west of Ukraine. Okay, and this is common knowledge. It's not like a big surprise. Okay, And what happens is that, see, the country has been sort of like teeter-tottering between the ethnic Russians and the ethnic Ukrainians. Now, Kolomoisky, as this oligarch, he is very anti-Russian for who knows why, but he is. And when Zelensky became president, he surrounded him with a lot of people who were from the right sector and other neo-Nazi fascist groups. There's the Azo Battalion, which is an actual battalion, which started out, by the way, as a football club. It was just football hooligans of the Metallist Club here in Kharkov, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. Well, some of them came from here, some of them came elsewhere. But Azo Battalion, that's where it started. That's how it got its start back in the early 2010s. And during 2014 and onward, these these hooligan gangs who were instrumental in the coup d'etat of 2014, they were trained by NATO to become an actual fighting force. In fact, the entire Ukraine military was trained by NATO for what's called interoperability. In all essence, the Ukrainian armed forces are NATO forces in terms of the equipment, tactics, communication systems, everything, because of this principle of interoperability, which is the NATO doctrine where any country that is of NATO, its military can be taken out and plugged in anywhere and they'll fit. You can have like a German and a French unit working together, or a Polish and an Italian team working together, no problem, okay? The Ukrainians were trained to NATO standards over the past 8 years from the coup of 2014. Now, what happens is Zelensky ran on this platform of being, inclusive and all the rest of it. And what happened was that, as soon as he became president, he started implementing laws that were anti-Russian, okay? Prohibiting the Russian language in official documentation and official government affairs, where before it had been both languages because the country was so evenly split between the two ethnic groups and the two languages. And so what happened over time was that there was a greater and greater crackdown on ethnic Russians, because what happens is that the ethnic Ukrainians, or more properly said, this very radical fringe of ethnic Ukrainians who are extremely nationalistic, fascist, extremely just fascist, basically, and they're thugs. It's not complicated. It seems complicated from the outside, but when you start getting into it, you realize it's very simple. They're thugs who want to impose Ukrainianism, Ukrainian nationalism throughout the country of Ukraine, irrespective of the ethnic Russians. And what happened is that this group, they cracked down on anybody who was considered, quote unquote, pro-Russian. And they purged them from the government, from the bureaucracy, from parliament, from every sector of society. They were punished politically and economically. Television stations were shut down, newspapers were shut down. It was all this push to make it pro-Ukraine, national Ukraine. Because what happened is that after the 2014 coup d'etat, a lot of these neo-Nazis and these thugs who were like left over from the revolution had been key in it because they'd been the agents provocateur in the violence that occurred in 2014. Well, they were absorbed into the Ukrainian armed forces and spread around. And so they spread out their ideology throughout the military and throughout the society, quite frankly. And so that's how you have this very small minority group after 2014 sort of like spreading their ideology throughout the country. And they were the ones who were instrumental in attacking the Donbass, because the Donbass is the most Russian area in Ukraine. And in the 2014 so-called revolution, which was really, like I said, a coup d'etat, they wanted to break away, and they tried to break away with assistance from the Russians. I mean, there's no question that the Russians helped, but it was really a homegrown movement because they felt abused. In fact, they were abused. And they broke away, and over the next 8 years, the previous government before Zelensky, Poroshenko, and then Zelensky, they continuously shelled the area of the Donbass, the cities, large cities of Lugansk and Donetsk, and the areas there. Shelling, that is, sending artillery, sporadically. Altogether, about 16,000 people were killed over the 8-year span. It was just this relentless grind, but they never tried to take it because the Russians had made it clear that that was a red line for them. And so what happens was that we started having these crises, and the United States saying in October of 2021 that the Russians were amassing forces on the border, which is not accurate. And they kept on insisting this. And
when you say it wasn't accurate, what was happening?
What was happening was that the Ukrainians were amassing forces on the contact line. The contact line is the line dividing the rest of Ukraine from these two breakaway republics. They were amassing forces. In fact, they amassed roughly 100,000 troops there, 100,000 combat troops. And their entire army, their entire armed force is 250,000, well, 260,000, 259 and change, if you want to be precise. Mm-hmm. And so what happened was that it was projection. They were accusing the Russians of doing what they were doing, which was amassing troops on the border of these breakaway republics, because the idea, which is becoming clear now, was to do a lightning strike and sweep through those two areas and take them. And the explicit goal was to annihilate the Russian population, to expunge the Russian population.
Okay, can I jump in here and just ask, because of course I have to play devil's advocate to some degree here, because I do not have all this information. But where is this information from? What are your sources that you get this from? Because obviously this is not common knowledge. These are not things that are coming out certainly in any type of Western mainstream media. So where's this information and these numbers coming from?
The Pentagon, the British Ministry of Defense, the Russian Ministry of Defense, and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, and the obvious fact that at this time, at that area, there are 60,000 Ukrainian troops that are trapped. The 60,000 are what remain of this original force of 100,000 that was gathered. And they're there trapped, and they're about to be annihilated. I mean, over the next week or two, they're going to be completely encircled. And the Russians have already said that they're going to annihilate them. I mean, they're saying publicly that they'll give every opportunity for them to flee and get out and all the rest of it, but they want them dead, probably because of the torture and murder of the Russian POWs that came out a few days ago, which has really galvanized the Russians. I mean, they are out for blood now because of those videos, because they were really horrific. I mean, that was unconscionable.
So the mainstream narrative, of course, on a surface level, has been posing Russia, Putin, absolutely 100% as the aggressor.
Evil, crazy.
But what you're saying is that, well, let's put the evil and crazy to the side for now, but certainly as the aggressors in the conflict. So what you're suggesting here is that it's more nuanced and complicated than that, and that there was aggression from the Ukrainian side in this region prior to that, just a matter of months ago.
Well, no, a matter of weeks ago. See, the Ukrainians.
I meant amassing the troops. You said towards the end of last year.
Yeah, towards the end of the last year and into the beginning of this year. And according to here, we come to some controversy, but we have to look at it in context. The Russians, the Ministry of Defense, is saying that they were the Ukrainian task force, the joint. I forget the name of the joint operating group or something they called it, which is basically the army that they had there, was going to launch its invasion, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, in mid-March. And that's why on the 25th of February, the Russians essentially beat them to the punch. That's basically what happened, okay? The Ministry of Defense, the Russian Ministry of Defense, is always extremely careful never to lie, which is really smart of them. Because whenever they have something that they don't really want to talk about, they just pretend it didn't happen. But they never actively lie. Unlike the Ukrainian side, which has this relentless PR machine. I mean, remember the Ghost of Kiev, the 13 on Snake Island, and all these stories that are just absurd. Well, the Russian Ministry of Defense plays it much cooler. And they're actually, in a certain sense, they're kind of right, because it doesn't really matter at this point. At the end of the day, the information warfare does not matter, because between winning the information war, the Twitter war, and winning the war on the ground, only one matters, okay? And so anyway, I neglected to point out some things that were going on. At the end of 2021, the decision was clearly taken to invade. And that's when the Russians actually started amassing troops to have them ready, okay?
Mhm.
Now, the Russians, they had proven in spring of 2021, because of some kerfuffle, that they could move a lot of troops really fast. At that opportunity, they moved 160,000 troops in 72 hours and really scared NATO, because it was just like, wow, that's fast, okay?
Mhm.
And so it seems, this part is like more like sort of like speculation, and there's a bit of evidence that might say this, but it seems that before, say, early December, the Russians really hadn't amassed much on the borders with Ukraine. It was all pretty much bullshit from the West. And that it was only after a meeting with Victoria Nuland, she flew to Moscow and essentially threatened the Russians. She told them to their face, you got to admire her chutzpah. She told them to her face that she would make sure that their economy was destroyed if they interfered with what was to come, which was,
Okay,
of
sorry,
course,
who's this you're talking about?
Victoria Nuland. She is the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in the Joe Biden administration,
Okay.
in the State Department.
Okay.
She is the woman who engineered the coup d'etat in 2014. There are recordings of her talking to the then ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt. The two of them talking about which candidates, which politicians would be the interim prime minister of Ukraine, even before the previous president, Yanukovych, had been deposed, okay? She's a well-known figure, and she has a deep and abiding anti-Russian hatred. I mean, it's really extraordinary. She hates them with a passion, okay? The reasons for that hatred, you'll just have to find out for yourself, but it's clear that she hates them. And she, like I said, micromanaged the revolution in 2014, and in 2021 and 2021, she went and threatened the Russians that she'd ruin their economy with sanctions and all the rest of it. And the Russians decided, you know, let's get ready for this. Okay, so basically, the Ukrainians were going to attack in mid-March. Why mid-March? It's unclear, but that seems to have been the target date. And what happened was that the Russians attacked first. Now, the Russians actually did something extremely clever. They came in with 190,000 troops. And by the way, this invasion, number one, it's going to be won by the Russians, unquestionably. And number two, it's going to be studied for decades as one of the most brilliant military campaigns in history. And a lot of your listeners are going to say, what is this guy talking about? But if you understand what the Russians are doing, you realize that it is brilliant. And let me explain. You see, the Russians, they carried out maneuver warfare because they're not interested in conquering territory. They have a political objective. And so they are executing that political objective. That political objective is twofold: demilitarize Ukraine and denazify it, okay? They don't care about the cities. See, the Americans, what do the Americans do? When they decide they're going to invade some country, they start sending planes to just destroy the infrastructure of the city. And they spend a few weeks at that while they amass an army. And once they have, just totally obliterated the city and turned it into rubble, they roll in with their tanks. It's pretty much of a mopping up operation, like what's going on in Mariupol, okay? Mm-hmm. But see, the Russians, they decided that they were going to attack Kiev, attack in the east in Kharkov, attack in the south from Crimea, attack from the Donbass in the southeast, if you will. And these multiple prongs, the aim was to pin down Ukraine forces, okay? The point of, for instance, attacking Kiev was not to take Kiev. Kiev is an enormous city. It's a modern city of, 3-4 million people, something like that. It's huge, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been there many times. I actually don't know the population. I ought to know that information, but it's huge, okay? And so taking that city, you need hundreds of thousands of troops, but threatening that city, you don't need that many. You need, 40, 50,000. And by having 40, 50,000 attacking troops, you can pin down a lot more of your enemy troops, in this case, the Ukrainian armed forces, which is what they've done. See, they attack and then pull back, attack and retreat and move around. And so that's why they never capture territory, because their goal is not to capture territory. Their goal is to pin down big chunks of the Ukrainian army. while the armies in the southeast, in the Donbass region, they're the ones who attacked the main army group, okay? And at the same time, the Russians went ahead and obliterated Ukraine's air defense systems in the first few hours, and they sank its navy also in the first few hours. And what they've been doing since the very beginning is destroying all of the resupply and munitions and fuel depots of the entire country. And they keep relentlessly hitting them one after very systematically. And see, so what happens is that when you have maneuver warfare, which is what they're carrying out, which is like classic World War II warfare, if you don't have gasoline, you can't move. If you can't move, you're a sitting duck. And that's what the Russians have been doing, okay? And so American commentators say, oh, they can't capture Kiev. Yeah, but they don't want to. I mean, that's not in the plan, okay? They can't capture Kharkov. I'm here in Kharkov, right, in eastern Ukraine. It's the second largest city in the country. It has a population, I think, of 1.8 million or something like that.
Okay.
I'm talking to you. The telephones work. I mean, the internet, cell phone, right? Internet works, water works, electricity, everything works, okay? Because the Russians aren't interested in hurting the infrastructure. That's not their goal. Their goal is to pin down Ukrainian armed forces, okay? Now, why are you seeing all these destroyed buildings? Very simple, because the Ukrainian armed forces, the Zelensky regime forces, are putting military equipment near civilian installations and infrastructure, schools and whatnot. And on Telegram, you can find tons of videos showing Ukrainian fighters sleeping in kindergartens, sleeping in hospitals that are empty, of course, of patients, but filled with soldiers with guns. They are deliberately putting their material, their weapons, their men in these civilian infrastructures so that they can draw Russian fire and claim an atrocity on the part of the Russians and whatnot. I mean, like yesterday, there was a picture on CNN, I think it was, and it showed a destroyed building. And the CNN headline said, Russians destroy building, a civilian building, right? But like right in the front of it, you saw a bunch of military vehicles. And so, of course, what the Russians had been doing is they didn't care about the building, They cared about wiping out those trucks, okay? And so that's what the Ukrainians have been doing, or the Zelensky regime people have been doing.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, how do you know? Okay, one of the problems, and honestly, with this whole conflict, I have not spent when it started. I did a bit.
Sure.
I did several hours of background research to at least understand a little bit of the history and what's going on. But one of the biggest problems, and this goes beyond this particular conflict, but I think one of the biggest problems we are having right now, perhaps across the world, but certainly in Western countries, is being able to know what is true and what is not, right? Being able to free ourselves of these, we all have our own biases, but then of course there's bias in the news. As we've already acknowledged, there's outright fake news that can be propagated on both sides of any issue. You have the cacophony of social media and all these opinions and influencers and people out there, whether on TV or not. And I reach a point, I think with this particular one, I just took a step back. I'm like, you know what? I have no idea what is true and what is not, because I will hear totally different things from different people. I mean, what you're saying here, it's very interesting, but I'm honestly also sitting here like, well, is this correct? Is this right? I'm not hearing this from other places. Then again, I'm not actively seeking it out. I just don't understand. How do you personally determine what sources are viable and what is true and what is false and what is propaganda? How do you yourself parse that out?
Well, first of all, there's a smell test, okay? And you have to have a nose for bullshit. And let me give you a specific example. About 4 or 5 days ago, it couldn't have been more than that, a week, let's say a week ago. Somebody was saying on Twitter and CNN, some big brain guy of some, think tank or whatever, he was saying that the Russians were completely demoralized, and one of the big problems was frostbite, that they were suffering from frostbite, And I knew instantly it was bullshit. that the guy was just making up out of whole cloth what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know that? Because I'm in Kharkov, right? And the temperature here over the last 4 weeks, since the start of this thing, has been very mild. I mean, yeah, it's dipped below zero, but I mean, not something that actually would bother you.
Not something that Russians are not used to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you have regularly, you live in an environment where during the winter it'll hit minus 20 degrees Celsius, right? And you're in combat, i.e., you're busy moving around and handling stuff and all the rest of it. And the weather is, it's floating between -1 and +5. How on earth can you get frostbite? I mean, you're not going to get frostbite, right? And so it's some rando, some big-brained NGO guy with a lot of degrees from a lot of fancy universities, and is telling some nonsense. You're going to just laugh. And here's something else that I realized. See, you went to Oxford, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I went to Dartmouth, which is an Ivy League school. And I, when I applied to college, I got my pick and was able to go to whichever I wanted to. Okay, the head of intelligence of Great Britain, HGCQ or whatever it's called, and he was claiming that the Russian morale was at a low point. It was just collapsing and all the rest of it. The exact opposite is the case right now. The exact opposite, and I will tell you exactly why. Because about 3-4 days ago, video started emerging of Zelensky regime soldiers. There's no pretty way of saying torturing and murdering Russian soldiers, Russian prisoners of war. It was horrifying. Okay, what they would do, and there's video of this, and I can tell you the exact location. It's about 25 kilometers from my current location in the center of Kharkov, just outside of Kharkov, at this milk factory. These Zelensky regime thugs had some vans with POWs, Russian POWs, which is perfectly normal. In every war, both sides capture enemy soldiers for whatever reason. It's normal. It doesn't mean that one side is winning or losing. It's just, the state of play. You have tens of thousands of soldiers. So if a handful of soldiers gets lost here or there, that happens all the time. And so these soldiers, Russian soldiers, clearly Russian soldiers, they've been identified. They were pulled off these trucks, these vans, and they were handcuffed, or not even handcuffed. It was just tied up with their hands behind their back. And they were shot in the knees with automatic weapons, and shot in the knees and shot in the groin, and left there to suffer. And the Zelensky regime thugs mocked them. And the thing is, see, these guys were taking video of it as a trophy, to show, how they were treating these Russian pigs, because these guys really hate Russians, really hate them. And the funny thing is that the Russians don't have this animosity towards them. They kind of it's not that they don't care, they just don't have that animosity. It's like, do you have, you're British, you're English, as I understand it, right?
Yeah.
Do you hate Scottish people? I mean, with a burning passion of 1,000 suns?
No, I love all people.
Well, but you see my point, These guys shot these Russian POWs, okay? A few of them died. It's known that they died, okay? There's no question that it was Zelensky regime.
Is this mainstream knowledge, by the way? Is this something that people are aware of?
In Russia, it is. They played it on the news in Russia, and people freaked out. People in China are completely freaking out over this, and in India as well. They think it's barbaric, because it is. And there is the other video that truly is the most horrific thing I've ever seen in my life. There's this boy, and he can't be more than 20, 21 years old, and they interrogated him, slapped him around a little bit, and then it cuts to an image of him. He's in a stairwell with a Zelensky regime thug who stabs him to death. And he gives him the coup de grace by gouging out his eye, and the knife must have slipped into his brain, and that's how he killed him. And the screams are horrifying. I mean, just truly horrifying. And the kid who died has been identified. The man who did it is identified. There's no question that it was Zelensky regime people, because that area where it happened, where it's been positively identified, that was under AFU control. And these atrocities were broadcast on the nightly news repeatedly in Russia. Okay, right now the mood in Russia is this has to get done, and we can't back off. We have to win and get rid of these Nazis. I mean, the morale, there is a sense of righteous indignation, okay? And that the Ukraine armed forces have to be not defeated, they have to be annihilated. And they have to, every single Nazi or proto-fascist or whatever you want to call them, has to be, either annihilated or captured and tried and hung. I mean, there is a rage to the Russians.
So is there a separation here between these fascists and Nazis and the general military, or are you conflating them all together?
That's the problem. That's the big problem. Because you see, the Azo Battalion and the Adan Battalion, and some of the other groups, White Sector and S14, and it's called S14, but the Cyrillic letter is a C, so sometimes people call it C14. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is that, see, after 2014, these groups were instrumental in the coup d'etat. And so they couldn't simply be dissolved. They had to be somehow given a reward. And that reward was to introduce them into the Ukrainian armed forces. And so it's unclear how much their ideology has permeated the whole of the Ukrainian armed forces. Mm-hmm. And because of these atrocities, which in the West, nobody is talking about them. And in Russia, in China, and India, it's the only thing they talk about.
So is this
outrageous?
Is this news and information? Is this easy to access?
Yes,
for anyone with an internet connection?
Yeah. Just go in and look for Russian POWs murdered, tortured, mm-hmm. Or Russian POW knifed to death, eye gouge. You Google it and you'll find. And I suggest you do not look at them. Okay. Mm-hmm. I wrote a long Twitter thread about it because I saw that. And you see, in my current circumstances, the SBU is definitely after me. The SBU is the Ukrainian secret police, or SBU, or perhaps it's just one of these thuggish groups, because a lot of times the SBU, what it does is that instead of them going out to look for somebody, they sort of like outsource it to one of these paramilitary fascist groups. And these paramilitary fascist groups will go out and do the dirty work for them. Now, this is not me just saying this. Like, there's the whatchamacallit, I can't change on my phone because I exist on my phone. And so I can't, if I change you, I'll cut the connection. So I can't do that. But on the pinned tweet on my Twitter account, there is a list of names of people that if you Google them, you will discover that each and every one of them was kidnapped by one of these goons of the paramilitary fascist elements, and then handed over to the SBU, who promptly tortured them, and in some cases murdered them. I can speak to you specifically about any one of those people in that list. Go to my Twitter account, which is Real Gonzalo Lira. Go to the pinned tweet. It's the first one there. You can't miss it. And there's a list of names. Zubi, actually, I don't know if you can do that, because unfortunately I can't do it on my phone because it'll break the connection.
Yeah, I can see it. I've got the names in front of me.
Can you read them, please?
Vladimir Struk.
Yes,
Denis
he was
Kiriv.
the mayor. Wait,
Okay.
hang on. Let me go.
Okay.
Point by point.
Okay.
Vladimir Struk was the mayor of a small town called Lemina, 18,600 people. He was kidnapped March 1st, I believe, and he was found 2-3 days later, shot through the heart, and they dumped him in the middle of his own town, the town where he was a mayor. And it's a small town. 18,000 people is not a major metropolis, right? And he was dumped there clearly to send a message. And the message was, we don't like anybody who calls for peace, because that's what he wanted. He wanted a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
Okay. So is that a Ukrainian or a Russian?
Ukrainian. Oh, he was, I don't know if he was ethnic Russian
Ukrainian
or not.
mayor. Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
but in Ukraine. All
Gotcha.
these people are
All
Ukrainian.
these people okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Then we have Denis Kiriv.
Denis Kiriv was one of the negotiators for the Ukrainian government when they met with the Russian negotiators, because the United States, when it goes to war, it doesn't negotiate. It negotiates, and then it stops negotiations and starts fighting. But the Russians continue negotiating even as they're fighting, okay? Because there are lots of very good reasons to negotiate with your opponent, to swap dead, or prisoners of war,
Mhm.
to create tactical ceasefires so that Red Cross can come in, stuff like that. Okay, the Russians continue negotiating with their enemies, and Denis Kiryev was one of the negotiators, and he was assassinated by the SBU, who were trying to arrest him because he was considered pro-Russian. Yeah, what that means exactly, we will never know. Next one, please.
Mikhail and Alexander Kononovich.
Yeah, they were young communists. They were head of the young communists, right? They were kidnapped. These kids are like in their early 20s, early mid-20s. They were kidnapped and they are being held by the SBU. Nobody knows exactly where. They're supposed to be tried for treason at some point in the indeterminate future.
Okay, next we have Nestor Shufrick.
Oh yeah, Nestor Shufrick. That was the case that really horrified me. That guy was he is a member of parliament, and he was picked up by fascist thugs. And there's a famous picture of him where this enormous thug with a beard, and like one of these big guys, right, has him like with his arm around his shoulder and like giving him like a half Nelson kind of thing. And in his hand, he's got a knife, a curved knife, right against Nestor Shufrick's throat. And Nestor Shufrick is like this little guy. I mean, he's a mid-50s, late 50s, I believe. And this enormous guy is taking a selfie, like a trophy, like, oh, look what I caught. And they kidnapped him. Then they took that selfie picture, which is horrifying. And then they bandaged him up and deposited him with the SBU. And then there's a video of an SBU intelligence officer berating him, verbally abusing him, shoving him around. I mean, scaring the hell out of him. And after that, nobody knows what happened to him.